Hello, everyone. I thought since it was the spooky season that we would talk about some scary literature. And of course, when I think of scary literature, the first thing that comes to my brain is Edgar Allan Poe. I grew up reading Poe after Stephen King. Stephen King was kind of my first foray into scary stories, and then I found Poe and read him voraciously. So I read Poe a lot throughout my youth, and I was happy to find as a teenager that there was an album, concept rock album, based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe. It was released in 1976 by the Alan Parsons Project, and that is what I would like to talk about today. Is this concept record and kind of how it connects to Poe, and how I feel they did as artists to kind of reinterpret Poe's work into music and out of the kind of literary field. Like I said, the album was released in 1976. It was the first album by the band Alan Parsons Project. Although it's called the Alan Parsons Project, the idea itself was originally created by Eric Wolfson, Alan Parsons' musical partner, and he, as a kid, also loved Poe and realized every time a Poe movie came out that all the kids and adults would kind of scramble to go see it. So as he grew up, he realized that everything that had to do with Poe had a tendency to do well. So he decided that he wanted to make a record about Edgar Allan Poe, and he recorded demos and brought them to Alan Parsons. Alan Parsons, as you know, is the engineer for Dark Side of the Moon. He worked on Let It Be, not as an engineer, but I don't know exactly what he did. I think he was helped an engineer or something. But he also worked on Let It Be. But really, truly, he's kind of the one of the geniuses behind the incredible sound quality of Dark Side of the Moon. And he decided that he wanted to create his own band that he could have a little bit more control over and kind of express his artistic vision, as well as his partner Eric Wolfson's vision. So they released it in 76. It did very well. In order to advertise the album, they got a hold of Orson Welles and asked him to record some radio spots advertising the record. To their surprise, he said yes, and they sent him kind of what they wanted him to read. He had it back to them within a week. And they used those for radio spots, but Alan was so taken with them that 10 years after the release of the album in 1986, they decided to re-release the record with additional recordings, not new songs, but they added some instrumentation to some of the songs. And they also added those Orson Welles dialogues into the album. And in my opinion, if you're going to listen to this record, you should listen to the 86 version. The added instrumentation gives some of the songs a more epic quality than they had originally. And of course, the Orson Welles edition is incredible. Hearing Orson Welles narrate these Edgar Allan Poe pieces is fantastic. So that's a little bit of the history of the album itself. Now I'd like to go over kind of just really quickly song by song and talk about how each song is connected to Poe and which story or poem they chose. The album opens with the instrumental track called A Dream Within a Dream. It's instrumental, although the 86 version does have the narration by Orson Welles that starts the entire album, and it's an incredible way to start the album. He has such an iconic voice, and Edgar Allan Poe is such an iconic writer. The two of them coming together is just an outstanding way to start this record. So it starts with narration, and then it goes into the instrumental, The Dream Within a Dream, which is based on Poe's poem of the same title. And in that poem, Poe is kind of challenging the concept of perception. Poe was one of the first writers to really incorporate psychology into horror. That's what made him so interesting at the time, and I still think is what keeps him alive and beloved today, his work at least, is his ability to kind of discuss and bring up ideas, psychological ideas that weren't really considered in horror before then. And this one is a very philosophical poem that deals with the concept of perception, and is the world that we perceive the actual world. And the instrumental actually really presents the atmosphere to this concept very well. It's a very unique instrumental. It sounds like it has a lot of keyboards in it, but in reality, the beginning is piano and hammer dulcimer and a recorder solo of all things. But if you listen to it, it sounds like a really eerie kind of almost synthscape. Really, really cutting edge stuff for the time. This song bridges directly into The Raven, which is, of course, based on Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven, probably the highest point in the album. The verse is sung by Alan Parsons himself, and he sings it through a vocoder, which I believe is the first use of vocoder in pop music ever recorded. And it sounds incredible. It's a very mysterious song. The lyrics really capture the concept of the poem itself, and it's just a really epic interpretation of a poem that was incredible on its own. The next song is about the short story The Telltale Heart, which is, of course, probably Edgar Allan Poe's most famous short story. And in order to bring the necessary insanity to the main character, they hired as a vocalist Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown is mostly known for his hit Fire. But he has many records beyond that, some very genre pushing, incredible records. But in this case, his specific style of vocalizing really shows the insanity of the character as his conscience presses down upon him, forcing him to admit to his crime. They couldn't have hired a better singer, and Arthur Brown is really just, this is an absolute classic vocal track from him. I highly recommend to listen to this one. This is followed by The Cask of Amontillado, which is, of course, another classic Poe story that deals with class, and basically the jealousy that can happen between classes, particularly a person in poverty who feels like somebody who is rich is constantly lording it over him, and decides to even the playing field by bricking him up into a wall in his wine cellar. This song is not as bombastic as the Arthur Brown Telltale Heart. It's quieter, it's more retrospective. And it looks at the sadness of the situation more than the direct horror of it. While the horror is still present, the song itself kind of is more of a reflection on the sadness of the breaking down of this friendship due to money. This follows into the System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, which is the single from this record. I don't know if it's the strongest piece, but for Alan and Eric Wolfson, they thought it was the strongest piece on the record, at least commercially. They felt it was the one that would sell the most, so they released it as a single. This is a unique story in Edgar Allan Poe's works. It is humorous. It does have horror in it, but it's also very, very kind of almost silly, clever and funny. It's about a doctor who hears about this revolutionary new technique that doctors are using in this specific asylum of tarring and feathering the patients. And he's very interested in this new technique, so he decides to go and visit the asylum and meet the doctors and ask them personally about their technique of tarring and feathering patients. And as the evening goes on, it is revealed that the patients have revolted, and the doctors are now the patients, and the patients are now the doctors, and everybody that's been tar and feathered were the doctors themselves and not the patients. The song has kind of it goes back to a kind of similar rock style to that of the Telltale Heart. It's not as introspective. It's more kind of direct, loud rock and roll to kind of mirror the chaos of the patients taking over the asylum. The next song is The Fall of the House of Usher. It's actually quite a few tracks brought into one. It's the longest piece on this record. It is instrumental, which makes perfect sense if you know the Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. While it does have a plot, the plot I feel is secondary to the kind of genius of the setting and the description and the tone of the language that Poe uses in that story make it so that it is almost a piece that is about atmosphere more than story. So Parsons and Wolfson decided to create a piece that is every bit as atmospheric as the story. It starts with a long orchestral moment and then moves on to some really classic Alan Parsons instrumentals that are absolutely beautiful, that use a variety of instruments that we don't often hear in rock records. Most of them I've brought up already. Hammer dulcimer, stand-up bass, double bass, and those kinds of things that create a sound that you don't hear often in rock, but that is incredibly atmospheric and just really beautiful all the way around. When I was younger, I'll admit that I skipped this song a lot because it didn't have the verse-chorus setup that the first part of the record did with all these songs based on the stories right at the beginning. So I found it challenging. But as I got older, I listened to it more and more, and it's become one of my favorite pieces of music overall. It's really outstanding, and if you give it a chance and listen to these really epic instrumentals, I think it will grow on you as well. The album closes out with 2-1 in Paradise. This is sung by Terry Sylvester, who was the lead singer of the Hollies for quite a while. It is almost a ballad. It's slower and more easy listening than the rest of the record. In many ways, this song is the map of what Alan Parsons Project became in the future. And Eric Wolfson even sings backing vocals, as does Alan Parsons on this track. It's based on a poem that is typical Poe fare in the sense that it's about somebody mourning the loss of their lover. 2-1 in Paradise, of course, means that he is writing to someone who is in heaven or has passed on to the paradise beyond life and is lamenting that loss. And the lyrics really show that and connect with that. And it is really just an outstanding way to close this album. They've captured Poe brilliantly, I feel. They've created some incredible, beautiful, moving music, some wonderful rock, all the way to moving classical pieces, ballads, and really everything in between. This album does not disappoint, and it is perfect for the Halloween season.